Welcome to Ladies Talking Love, Season 3, Episode 4, Talking to Kids About Sex, Part 2. It's Ladies Talking Love, a community of women uncovering more joy and fulfillment in sex, as we learn from experts and amazing women like you. Together, let's create a world where women's sexuality is celebrated and understood, beginning with our own. I'm your host, Ariel Finlinson. Let's talk love. I'm excited to bring you part 2 of our series, Talking to Kids About Sex. This can be such a tricky topic to know what ages we start talking to our kids about healthy sexuality and about sex, how to talk to them. And in this episode, because of the ages from 9 to 12, we're going to also be talking quite a bit about puberty, which definitely falls into the category of healthy sexuality, and kind of how to bring those conversations up with your preteens, what to talk about, what they should know so that they can understand not only their own body, but also the body of the opposite gender of their classmates and know what's kind of going on. And so they won't have experiences that maybe some of us have had. I've heard too many stories of women thinking they were dying when they started their period because they didn't know what it was. Or if they did know what it was, they still didn't have a lot of information about what type of products they could use. And so I think as parents, we can do a lot better of a job helping our teens be prepared for this big life change that they're going to experience in their bodies. And even though it can be hard, hopefully making it a positive experience for them. And Dr. Padilla-Walker has some great tips and things that she recommends as we're talking to this age group about not only puberty, but also sexuality. And I hope that it will be helpful for those of you who have kids in this age range or are just getting ready and prepping, because heaven knows we all need help to prep for all the ages, talking to our kids about sex. Dr. Laura M. Padilla-Walker is a professor in the School of Family Life at Brigham Young University. She received her PhD in developmental psychology from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in 2005. Her scholarship focuses primarily on how parents socialize adolescents' positive behaviors, with special emphasis on parent-child communication about healthy sexuality and pro-social media. Aside from over 100 journal publications, Dr. Padilla-Walker has co-authored a book for parents on how to teach their children healthy sexuality. She is currently serving as the Dean of the College of Family, Home, and Social Sciences. She and her husband, Chris, are the parents of 3 children. Before jumping in, I would just love to ask that if this podcast has been helpful for you, if you could hop on and leave a review, that would be super awesome. It helps other people find the podcast, know what we're about. And this week, as you're listening, if you think of any other parents who would benefit from this series of talking to our kids about sex, I would really appreciate if you could share it with them. But without further ado, let's talk love. I'm so grateful to have Dr. Laura Padilla-Walker on Ladies Talking Love again to do our second section of Talking to Kids About Sex. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
We're going to be covering ages 9 to 12 now. So in our last episode, we did birth to about 7 years old. And so when we're looking at children ages 9 to 12, what are some of the important things that you would say that this age group needs to start to understand about sex?
I think one of the questions to start with is this a 9 to 12-year-old with whom you've already been talking about sex? Or is this a parent who's saying, oh, shoot, I have a 9 to 12-year-old and I haven't been talking about this? So you might start from a different place.
Yeah.
So if you've been ideally talking about sexuality and healthy development from the time they were young, it will be more of the same and just becoming more specific and more detailed as they ask more questions and as things come up. If you haven't, which is perfectly fine, there's no shame in starting where you're at, then you just begin maybe a little bit more gently. You can even begin with sitting down and saying, you know what, this is a really important topic, healthy sexuality and developing your sexuality. And I don't feel like I've done the best job talking with you about it. And I'd really like to do better. So do you have any questions? Just starting out, helping them to feel comfortable. So So my first response is just, it depends on where the parent is.
Yeah.
In their journey talking about this.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I feel like so many parents are like, oh no, I never started. I'm too late, but you're never too late. And I love it. Like, just start where you're at. And if you haven't, you might need to kind of start back where what we talked about in the birth 7 and start talking about names of body parts. And that's totally fine. We can start where we're at and just build from there with our children.
And in our society today, 9 to 12 is when most of our children are going to go through puberty, or at least the beginning. I mean, girls start puberty about 2 years before boys do. And so it is not uncommon to have 7, 8, 9-year-olds beginning to show breast buds or to even start their menstrual periods as early as 9 or 10. You need to talk to them about what's going to happen to their body and what changes they're going to experience before you think it's going to happen. Because as a parent who has 2 teenagers, it happens earlier than you think it will happen. And this includes boys. So we do a decent job of talking to our girls about what a menstrual period is going to be, but we don't do a good job talking to our boys about what spermarchy or wet dreams are going to be like. And they need to understand that just as much as girls need to understand what's happening to their body. So explaining to them, these are some changes that are going to happen to your body. And whether you pull out a book and show them different parts of their bodies that will change, or whether you just talk to them about it, this is a real time to start preparing for puberty and being ready for it, your own self emotionally as a parent, but also for your child, so that they're ready and not scared when their body starts changing.
Do you happen to know the average ages now that girls and boys are starting?
Yeah, so it's usually, again, there's a range, but it's usually 10 to 12 for girls for their first menarche. And then for boys, it's usually just 2 years after that. But there's a pretty wide range. So for girls in particular, it's related to the percentage of body fat that they have, because their bodies are preparing to have a baby, right? And so if you have girls who are a little bit heavier or have more body fat, then they tend to start a little bit earlier.
Okay.
And boys, it's not so much related to that. But in junior high or grade school, where you see the girls taller than the boys and the girls developing, this is that very awkward time.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe the way that we keep young kids from wanting to date or something, because they're so awkward together, when that early, late childhood, early preteen time can feel pretty awkward to them. So talking to them about their physical development, their social development, and again, it can really vary. So let's say you have a girl who's an athlete. Sometimes they won't start their period until they're 17 or 18.
Yeah.
It really varies. So just help them to be prepared whenever that might begin.
And could you give us some examples from your own experience with your teenagers and some of your research and interactions with other parents as you've taught and educated and researched all these things? What would some of those conversations, could they look like? Like, what would you tell about wet dreams to kind of help boys transition through puberty and girls? Like, I'd love to hear just some examples of what are some important points you think that parents need to talk about.
Well, again, if you've already been talking about their bodies and they understand a little bit about their bodies, you might want to start talking about, especially for young men, you might want to be talking about erections and how sometimes, and they're going to notice this from a young age, especially if they self-stimulate, which many young children do. But you're going to have already described to them why sometimes the penis gets hard and sometimes it's not. And then as they get older, you might explain that it gets hard so that, they can have sexual intercourse when they're married, and that this is how babies come. But then you might talk to them about how they're going to start potentially feeling, you might talk about arousal and what that's going to be like, and that they might start to feel sexual feelings and how it's okay to sit with those. And again, I don't know that you need to get into it a ton, but talking to them about, this is how, pregnancy works. This is how sperm is ejaculated, so that they're aware of it when it happens. They know, oh, this is what's happening, instead of heard so many stories from my students of young women who didn't know what their period was and they're bleeding. It was very traumatic for them to not know what was happening.
They're dying.
To not know what was happening to their body. But again, it really depends on your family composition. My daughter is 18, so she just very openly has her period and talks about it to her younger brother and all. He very much knows what a period is and knows. And that's actually a good point that I just thought of, was you have to talk to your girls about the way girls' bodies work, but also the way boys' bodies work, and then vice versa. That we don't just talk about, okay, this is the way your body works, but this is the way other people's bodies work, so that they understand.
Yeah. And can have compassion for each other. a girl who came on that podcast. She talked about how she was talking to her daughter about periods and how she was going to start menstruating. And then she talked about erections for boys and how that can sometimes be embarrassing because it'll just happen. And it was just the coolest thing because she shared her daughter came home from school and she's like, a boy in my class had an erection and I noticed and I wanted to laugh because it was funny, but I remembered what you said. And so I didn't laugh because I wouldn't want them to laugh at me if I, leaked and got blood on my pants. And so it was just such a cool, empowering moment to see that, if we can be talking to our kids about both of these things that happen through puberty, they can support each other and have compassion for each other. And I really liked that story. What would you tell to boys about wet dreams to help them understand that they might start happening and what that would be like?
I mean, I think you can start conversations like this with teenagers, just talking about change and how exciting it is and how our bodies are going to change and we're getting ready to be adults. In a lot of other cultures, they celebrate adulthood in a way that we don't really celebrate in the United States, at least some of us. And so really trying to get some of that spirit of celebration and then talk about how the first part of this is that you might start having something that we call wet dreams. That's not the scientific name, but you could call it that, and that this is what it might look like. And so you might notice that you might wake up with something in your underpants, and feel free to talk to me about it. Or this is totally normal, though. It's just your body getting ready and practicing the things that it needs to do so that you can be a dad someday. When they're younger, if they're 7, 8, 9, and then getting older, you might talk to them, in a little bit more detail, especially, young boys' first experience with ejaculation is through masturbation. So talking about masturbation, that's a word that's also hard for people to say. So it's a good one to it's okay to just talk to your children about that and talk about that the feelings are very normal and very natural that they might have. But here's, some of the things that we might try to do to keep that behavior, wherever your value is.
Yeah.
This is also an age where body image can become a real challenge. And sometimes we think that's only for young women, but it is increasingly for young men as well. And so talking about their bodies in a way, again, your bodies are going to change. And sometimes the changes of puberty really can lead to negative body image. So we want to always be talking about these changes in a positive way, even though some of the social effects of the changes are not great. You might be getting pimples, your voice might be cracking. It can be very embarrassing, or, one breast is larger than the other, all these different things that happen that are embarrassing to young people who feel like they're under a microscope. But helping them to feel positive, these changes are leading towards this goal that you have when you get older and you're going to get married and you're going to have children and it's going to be wonderful. Or just talking about the joy of their bodies and how beautiful they are, no matter what size they are, that body is beautiful. And that as long as we're healthy, that we should feel really happy about how our bodies look. So trying to speak in that positive way to try and stave off some of the really negative body image that young people have around the end of this age period we're talking about.
What are some signs that you might look for in your children on this age to show that they may be starting to have some negative body image?
They'll probably be pretty open about it. Now, one thing as parents you need to be careful of, and this is really hard for us, especially as moms, is to not say negative things about our own bodies or our own selves. And that's really hard because a lot of us feel those negative things and we think those negative things. And even if we don't say anything, they're going to get plenty of messages about body image from the media. And so really trying to talk about not only our bodies, but other people's bodies. So sometimes you might see someone and say, oh, wow, she's really put on a lot of weight. Or, oh, you might make a comment and you don't think anything of it, but your children are listening to that. Yeah. So starting by, talking about your own body positively. But if you hear your child say something like, Mom, do you think my legs look fat? They'll start asking questions like that. Again, these are very brief sentences that you might say, but no, your body is beautiful and strong. You can also, from a really young age, but especially at this age, make sure you're not only describing them in terms of physicality. So it's very common for, oh, she's so pretty, she's so cute, and he's so handsome and strong. And then I usually respond with, yes, and she's also intelligent and funny and creative. Helping children and young teenagers to see themselves as more than just their physical bodies, that they have lots of different strengths and gifts that God has given them. And one of them is the ability to procreate, and that will be a wonderful thing for many people. But there's also many other things that we can praise them for other than just their physical appearance.
Yeah. And I've been so nervous actually about this topic of negative body image because I struggled with an eating disorder in high school. And just there are so many messages, even if as parents we're trying to help our kids see that their bodies are good and that, yeah, they're more than a body, like Lexi and Lindsay Kite would say, that there's just so many messages coming in from the outside. Sometimes I worry that what I say or think won't be enough to help them. Do you have any tips or thoughts on what we could do to kind of combat a lot of these messages coming from movies and other people's comments and things like that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, as a parent, probably what we can do is never enough to combat, to combat what's coming from the media. And so the best thing we can do is help our children to be good critical thinkers. And sometimes as parents, we want to try to protect them from every negative influence, but instead we need to help them think critically. So for example, when you're watching TV or when you walk by a magazine article or you walk by Victoria's Secret or something, you can just make comments that help them. I might say to my daughter when I walk past, or my son, when I walk past Victoria's Secret, what do you think that woman must be feeling that she's there in her underwear? How do you think that makes her feel? Sort of giving some early thoughts about pornography and why looking at people who are naked, make sure that they're seeing them as people and trying to think about what they might be thinking. But also, helping, you see a commercial for a diet pill or a diet bar or something that talks about your physical appearance and asking them questions about it. What do you think? Is that really effective? Do you think that's what we should be focusing on? Or should we be focusing on our beautiful, strong, healthy bodies? And it can, again, just be something really brief that Utah, which is where I live, I don't know where all your viewers live, but it has very high rates of plastic surgery and there's billboards all over the place. And so there's easy opportunities to bring that kind of thing up and say, I know it's easy to worry about that, but how about we focus on how healthy our bodies are instead? And just little things that help to replace and help them. Then when they see that, they're going to be more likely to think critically about it.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And I've had kids with their beautiful honesty, like, Mom, like your belly's kind of big, or look at the fat on it. And sometimes for me, especially with my background, I have to like take a deep breath and be like, yes, I do have fat. Like, isn't that awesome? I'm so grateful that I have fat. It helps me live. And like, I need fat. And just my daughter, it's been fun to see her, some of these critical thinking skills that happen when they're young, like coloring a picture of a princess. And she'll be like, Mom, like, all their breasts are big and their waists are skinny and their feet are tiny. And I'm like, isn't that
not
so
realistic?
Weird that, that's not how bodies really are. And they're making all of the bodies the same, so it's just been fun to see those thought processes. I like that, just as we can take little comments to help our kids think critically. I was curious as well, could you give a quick example of what you might talk to a girl about menstruation? What would you help kind of to prepare her?
And again, this feels so much more natural for me because I am a woman, but really the research finds that it's not about moms shouldn't have to talk to girls and dads to boys. It's about whoever has a relationship with them, whoever can have the conversation. But I think that's easier to start earlier. For me, with my daughter, it was easier because I would be having my period and she would ask me what that was. And so I would just talk to her about it. This is my body, getting ready to have a baby. And if I don't want, if I'm not having a baby that month, then this is what happens. And explaining that process to them. And then just helping them to, explaining to them, this is going to happen to your body. You're going to start having changes. You might see this happen. We want to probably have some maxi pads in your backpack starting at a particular age, again, depending where your daughter is in her development, and just letting her know this is, being proactive about it. This is, if you see that this happens, you don't have to be really worried about it. Just if you feel it, or if you see it in your underwear, then just give me a call and here's what you need to do, just so that they feel prepared and empowered. And again, then it's a celebration. I challenge parents to celebrate, have a party, do something. Kids might be mortified, but this is important. This is a rite of passage. You are, have the ability to create a human being. That is amazing. And so talking about it in that positive way, because teenagers see, and many women see, menstrual periods as a big hassle, and it can feel that way. But if we can set it up as a positive thing, then they won't feel scared.
Do you have any other thoughts on how to make it a celebration? Because I remember when I started, I was like sick. So I was like, this isn't fun.
This doesn't feel like it's yeah. And I guess preparing them for that too. It's hard to know. For some people, it could be really painful. For others, it won't be that bad. But I think it really depends. So some children are going to be so mortified. I had a student tell me once that her dad made her like invited all her friends over and made her uterus shaped pancakes, and she'd never forget. She was so embarrassed. I thought it was kind of great, actually. Go Dad. I was proud of him. I think I just took my daughter out to dinner, and it was kind of you're a woman now, your first step. It's sort of like, in the Latino culture, there's a quinceañera. It's similar to that. Why can't we celebrate this transition to adult? This is your first step towards being an adult, and whatever that feels like for your family, thinking about how that could make it special for the boys and the girls. I know it's like, what parent's going to celebrate a wet dream? Well, we should be celebrating our children's ability moving towards being an adult, and thinking about ways that we can do that that feels sacred to you, that feels special to you, but also that normalize the behavior and help children realize that they can talk about this and that it's normal and healthy.
I definitely have more work to do as my kids get older. It'll be fun to see how it all plays out.
You're doing
great. I'm learning, and it's been fun to see my kids. They want to know what's happening in bodies, and they love seeing when I'm on my period and like, oh, I found your menstrual cup, and it's like, oh, good. Okay. So I love that. As one more question I had about this age group is, how would you start to describe arousal to them? Because I remember kind of being in this age group and hearing about arousal, but it felt so vague that I didn't even know what it meant. And so how would you kind of describe arousal to this age group?
Well, one way to start is we get aroused in all kinds of different ways. So we have emotional arousal, we have intellectual arousal. So I think we can talk to them about it that way. You can get emotionally, when you talk to somebody about something you really like. So with my boys, that would be video games, and you get really excited and aroused. Well, our bodies also can feel that way sexually. There's a picture that we use, but most arousal is, the slope of arousal is not as steep as sexual arousal is. So then we can show them this is emotional arousal. This might be what social arousal or intellectual arousal, and sexual arousal can be much more steep. But with all of those different behaviors, let's talk about what it might look like physically. This is what it might look like. So for a young woman, you might talk about lubrication. You might talk about what it might feel like. Again, there's variability in young women and young men. It might be easier to talk about it with young men, but I think it's really important with young women too. We can't assume that they're not having arousal as well. I think sometimes parents want to believe that their young women don't have sexual feelings, and that's just not the case. So just explaining to them what it might feel like. And one of the biggest concerns, and I'll probably say this again in the next episode, that parents have is, if I talk about this, surely they're going to then experience it. And there's no research to support that. And in fact, there's much research that doesn't support that. So if you mention arousal, it's not like your child's going to suddenly experience arousal. They were experiencing it anyway, or they will experience it. So you're giving them the language they need to understand what's going on, and then the safety that they need so that they can come and talk to you about it.
And for this age group, would you more focus on kind of just talking about what arousal is so they can start to notice it? Would you start to incorporate some of your values as well as like what to do when you feel arousal at this age group?
Yeah, I would probably, again, if you've been talking about this since they were young, they might not experience arousal, but it's going to feel good when they touch their body. And that's why children self-stimulate, because it feels good. It's not necessarily sexual. It just feels good. And so from that early age, you can talk about it feels good when you touch yourself, doesn't it? And then you can give some value statement if you have a value statement about whether or not, that's something that you want to do with your body, or that, again, it's very normal. And we find from research that one of the most important things is normalizing the feeling that they're having, no matter what your value is about that behavior, is normal. These feelings you're having are normal and good. So what should we do with them now? What do we do with them? But I would definitely, especially, 11 and 12, 10, 11, 12, your kids are probably, many of you, they're hitting puberty, they're having wet dreams, they're beginning to menstruate. So talking about strategies for when you feel arousal. So you're sitting in the middle of class and you get an erection. What are you going to do? You feel aroused by a variety of things. Are you going to act on that, or how can you sit with it and let it pass and realize that, oh, I don't have to act on that every time I feel that. Just being really open about, and some kids are going to be like, Mom, I do not want to talk about this, but just trying to normalize it as much as possible so that they know that they can talk to you about it when they have concerns, and they understand what's happening to their body and they don't feel shame about it.
Yeah. How would you describe sitting with arousal to them?
Well, sometimes I have colleagues who study mindfulness. And so talking to children a little bit about what it means to be in the moment and to be mindful and understand that you're feeling something, but that doesn't mean that you have to have a behavior that's attached to it. So you don't have to masturbate every time that you feel aroused. that might be a response that's fairly normal, but that doesn't, like, we can talk through what some other options are. You can sit with that feeling. You can understand that you're feeling it. You can think, you distract yourself. You can think about other things. You can, so being mindful, but then also giving them tools for alternatives to acting on arousal, if that's something you want to help them develop.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And like maybe finding a way to be creative, going and painting something or going on a run or having that arousal. And I love that idea of talking about all different types of arousal. I tried to start doing that and it's really awkward for me still because it's like, I think of arousal as sexual arousal and something like I was aroused. Oh my. But I love that idea of just normalizing the word arousal in our conversations. Yeah. Arousal happens in all these different areas of our life.
And so does self-control. And so that's another thing that, just like you have emotional arousal, you need to control your emotion. And just like you have intellectual arousal, you need to control that arousal. And same with physical arousal. Any types of arousal that's unchecked is going to be a challenge. But helping them, you mentioned, getting up for a run. Physical exercise is one of the best things. So you might have a young man who's starting to masturbate quite frequently at this age. And we can talk about this more in the next episode, but talking about the importance of getting up and moving other parts of your body. Boredom is, is something that is really going to interact with this as we get into the teenage years. So helping kids to be physically active and feel the other things that their body can do and the other ways they can be physically aroused other than just sexually really helps them to be able to manage some of those strong feelings.
Thank you. Is there anything else you would add for parents of preteens?
I think so. Just an exciting time.
I hope that this episode was helpful for you in starting to think about some areas that maybe you feel uncomfortable talking about so you can start practicing. And if you haven't started these conversations like we talked about in this episode, it is never too late. We make so many mistakes as parents, but I think one of the beautiful things about us coming to our kids and letting them know that we aren't doing it perfect and we need their help and this is something we want to do better at, I think that helps really create a safe environment where hopefully more questions can be asked. And if you don't know the answer, it's okay to say, I don't actually know. Let me do some research. This has been my experience, but let's look into this a little more. And I think that can create such a beautiful balance of communication between a parent and a child. I definitely feel uncomfortable myself thinking about talking about wet dreams. I think part of it is just because I'm a woman, and so I haven't experienced wet dreams. And so that's an area that I need to practice, and I want to talk more about with my husband about what his experience was like, and so that I can be more comfortable to talk with my sons and daughters about boys' changes in puberty. And I think it's so impactful to include our partner in these conversations. Recently, someone was telling me a story that her son was starting to have some erections and he was letting her know that sometimes it was uncomfortable and he didn't know what to do. She didn't know what to do because she had never had an erection. And so she asked her husband, and her husband just mentioned, hey, like I usually just kind of put my penis in my underwear this way, and that helps it not be as uncomfortable. I just think that's so powerful that we can learn together as a couple and learn with our children and help them see that we're here to support and help them. And maybe with your faith tradition and values, you are going to want to encourage not masturbating when an erection happens. And even though I'm not very good about including the word arousal with other areas of our life, I want to do better at that because I think it's so important for our kids to see, wow, I get aroused in these other areas of my life as well, just like when I'm angry or when I'm feeling frustrated, and I need to channel that emotion in a proper way. And so we can also do that with our sexuality when we are aroused or when we experience an erection. We don't have to end the cycle. And I have a really great episode that I'll link in the show notes by Dr. Shalom Levitt, and she talks a lot about talking with our teens about arousal and how to sit with arousal, and that it doesn't need to be this cycle that's ended through masturbation, but that actually it will just end naturally because it has its own cycle. And not assuming that girls don't feel arousal. They might not recognize it as arousal, especially because I think our culture doesn't really support the idea that women feel arousal. And so including them in those conversations as well and how to sit with arousal, I think is so important. I really appreciated Dr. Padilla-Walker's insight into looking critically at the media as well. I feel like I was doing better several years ago, kind of mentioning weird things I saw in the media and just kind of being this voice of questioning to help my kids critically think. And I've gotten out of the habit. So it was a good reminder to get back into it. And I also really loved her idea that when she walked past Victoria's Secret, she asked about how those people might feel because it brings humanity into these pictures instead of the way pornography is viewed, objectifying people. It helps our kids and us recognize every picture that we see is a person. They have a story. They have feelings. And apparently I had a lot to say today. But one more thought. When we're talking about puberty, I just think celebrating our kids coming into adulthood is awesome and beautiful. That story of the dad who made the uterus pancakes was just so good. I'm sure that was so embarrassing though. But I want to celebrate my kids coming into adulthood and celebrate these changes in their body that can be so hard, but helping them see that their bodies are good, that how their bodies are changing is good. And especially with so much of the focus around us on body image, with so many comments people make, now that I've been paying attention for a while, it is constant to hear body image comments about my kids, about myself being pregnant more than ever, because when you're pregnant, apparently people are like, oh, you look so good is a normal thing to say. But it's not about my body, and all our bodies are different during pregnancy. All our bodies are different, period. And I want to help my kids know that their bodies are good no matter how they look, and help them critically think about the comments that people make about bodies, about the way the media portrays sexuality as being only pretty much about how bodies look, that only beautiful people get to love and get to be in romantic relationships, all of these things to help them think critically about and to help them realize that it's not about how their body looks. Of course, we need to take care of our bodies. And in some of the ways we may realize we're not taking care of our bodies, maybe we should exercise more regularly and we could eat more vegetables. But I don't want the focus on taking care of our bodies to be about changing our bodies. Some of these actions that we take to be healthier may cause some body changes to occur, but that's not the point. The point is that our bodies are going to be how they're going to be, and we get to be in a position to take care of them the best that we can. But we don't need to try to change them to fit these cultural norms that are so unrealistic and unhealthy and so focused, especially for women, so focused on how our bodies look versus who we are as a person. And I was really grateful for Dr. Padilla-Walker's reminder that a lot of times it starts with us, that I need to show my children how I respect my body and how I appreciate her, and not to make negative comments about my body. And I've been working hard on that because, as I've mentioned, I've really had a big struggle with body image throughout my life. And even looking back at some of my pictures after having my third child, now I just see this mom who's just had a baby and is in this place of beauty after just having a baby. But in the moment and right after those pictures were taken, it was really hard for me to look at them because I felt so uncomfortable in my body. And I want to help my kids see that I appreciate my body and all the changes. I want my kids to see that I see my body as good no matter what. And so changing the way I talk about my body, and also talking about her out loud as I'm trying a new exercise, say, wow, look at what my body can do. I've never done this before, and I'm learning and I'm getting better, and focusing on how awesome our bodies are versus how they look has been something I've been working on, and I need to keep working on. Thank you for listening to my long ramble. I just apparently had so many thoughts about this today, but I would love to hear any of your thoughts as well. Write me on Instagram at ladies.talkinglove or email me at hello@ladiestalkinglove.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic, and if you had any awesome ways to celebrate moving through puberty or really embarrassing ones that happened, I would love to hear that too. As always, thanks for talking love. Thank you to all of you who listen and join me on this journey, and to our Ladies Talking Love team who make the podcast possible. Thanks to our sound wizard, Brett Hansey, our newsletter guru, Lauren Barton, and our miscellaneous task whiz, Jana Norman. As always, thanks for talking love.